Hello, everyone. Welcome to The Reason We Learn. I'm your host, Deb Fillman. At The Reason We Learn, we aspire to be part of the solution. The purpose of this show is to take a good, honest, potentially painful look at the way kids are being educated. We know we can do better, and this is where we'll talk about how. Let's learn something. Hello, everyone. Welcome to The Reason We Learn. I'm so glad you're here today. I have a great show planned for you. If you are new to the channel and interested in being part of the solution to our education crisis, I hope you will subscribe to be notified when I make new content. Please also like and share this broadcast so others can benefit from the information we're about to share. Each of these shows is an opportunity to hear from people who are working to improve not just education, but our culture, our country, but in particular education any way they can. And this one is no exception. Ron Coleman is joining me today. I've followed him on Twitter for a long time. I'm a big fan. He's a partner in the Dillon Law Group. He's a commercial litigator focusing on First Amendment and business litigation. And he's an active advocate for traditional values on social media. I've invited him here today to talk to us about the idea that what we're seeing in our schools with what some people call woke, regardless of what subdivision of it you look at, whether it's gender, race, globalism, decolonization, the whole thing is actually a new form of religion. And so I've invited him here to talk to us about what he thinks about that idea and what he thinks we need to do about it. So please join me in welcoming Ron Coleman.
Thank you, Deb. Thank you very much for having me on. And it's a great for me to have an opportunity to discuss these issues from your perspective. Education is something that's really important in our household. My wife and I are terribly overeducated, and our it's a book house. It's a learning house.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Right. Yes. So and also as Jane writes for Legal Insurrection, and has been so we are often discussing the cases that she's following, many of which have to do with the breakdown of the public schools, of the public education in general, but also, it's especially been obvious over the last few months, the real meltdown in what was once considered elite private higher education. So I've got a lot of thoughts on this topic.
Well, I'm so glad because I have a lot of questions. I saw you on Adam Coleman's show last week, and you were talking with him about the issue of things that are being taught in our schools and all the way up through college really resemble faith. We have faith-based ideas, not faith like you and I are familiar with or anybody else, but they're not grounded in reality, right? Is that fair to say?
Well, let's put it this. Yes. I mean, unlike a traditional religion, on the one hand, they make claims about the physical world, including history, that are not only not amenable to proof, but which are contradicted by proof. But they reject the entire concept of using rational thought and objectivity. In fact, the entire concept of objectivity is considered to be subjective. That in and of itself is not a new philosophical concept, but the idea that children should be taught, or adult children, such as we have in colleges, should be taught narratives rather than history, or should have conclusions that are set out in advance and that are not amenable to being questioned, is, it is like a religion in the sense that it requires unquestioning faith on a certain level.
Right. But, one of the things I hear from people when I bring this up, that they are sounding more like, I actually call it a cult. I think it's different from religion enough that it's fair to call it a cult. And there are reasons why I'm not going to get into, but people will, when I challenge them and say, you're advancing something that's based on faith, there's nothing, to hold on to. What's interesting is they'll move very swiftly from sort of denying your claim right over to, well, what about Judaism and Christianity? Don't they do that? Like somehow that makes it okay. First of all, no, they don't. And I was hoping you could speak to that a little bit, that that's actually false.
Well, it depends on what exactly it is that someone is saying that. I mean, in fact, as I was finishing the formulation in my last answer, it occurred to me, all right, so how is that different from a traditional religion?
Right.
Yes, there are some things that a religious believer considers to be fundamental, small f. Fundamental, there's a God. I mean, let's talk about monotheism. There's a God, there is one God. God created the universe. There is special revelation. In other words, God has communicated with humanity through the prophets. And there are a series of such, such propositions. Maimonides laid out what he considered to be 13 non-negotiable propositions for believers in Judaism, and some of his near contemporaries quibbled, but none of these goes to the matter of whether we can use our rational faculties to analyze the world around us, which, I mean, obviously Maimonides did this. He was a physician and a scientist. Whether 4 plus 4 equals 8 or something else, it only can equal 8. Whether being on time is a cultural, bias, or whether it means being on time. Yes, there are religions do have this quality of having certain topics that are beyond, that are not subject to debate. I think an excellent way of comparing it is, let's consider, look, taking a step back, the entire woke, as you put it, and it's a very good. I know some people they roll their eyes when they hear that term, but it happens to be a good way of capturing the entire mindset that has taken over elite institutions, including academia, and which is informed very powerfully by cultural Marxism. And if you reject the term cultural Marxism, which I have seen some people reject, let's then just call it Marxism. It's not up for debate whether or not it's informed by Marxism. It is. It's historically, it's Hegelian, and it's Marxist. And what is the premise? There are forces of history that are called progress. And these are they're not subject to debate. There will be this kind of change in history. There are these values that must be recognized. That Marx posits an historical progress, in which revolution plays a very large part. And it's the premise of all these woke philosophies, of Black Lives Matter, of LBQT plus, what I can't keep track. all these ways of thinking and looking at the world are based on this idea that the existing order is to be destroyed. Traditional values don't inform us at all with respect to how we should deal with and relate to other people. And there's no historical, these hypotheses, they're not hypotheses, they are factual premises to which no response may be made. In contrast,
Right.
let's talk about Jewish eschatology, if I can borrow a phrase from Christianity. There are a number of different opinions in the rabbinic tradition of how and when it ends. what the future looks like, what the world to come looks like, what the afterlife looks like. But none of them require us to suspend disbelief about the world that we're living in right now.
Right.
We may or may not, at the time of the revival of the dead, be returned to we may not have our bodies returned to us. There's a dispute about that. The third temple may descend from heaven without any terrestrial involvement in its construction. There are different concepts, but none of them requires me to say a man is a woman, or correct answers on standardized tests are not correct answers.
Right.
We're dealing with, yes, we have a tradition about what the future holds for us, and it includes many profound and, for most of us, hard to accept. To be honest, hard to accept rationally propositions about the future that are metaphysical, to say the least. But we acknowledge that this is the point at which we are jumping into faith.
Right.
But meanwhile, when I wake up in the morning, I'm conducting my life in an earthly way, recognizing that God's hand is everywhere, but that God has provided for us a universe with rules and paradigms, and there are a million different philosophical ways to understand how we get from the divine to the everyday. But we can reckon with the reality that we see in front of us, and we don't have to pretend that things are different from what we know them to be. And that, again, and this has really taken hold, this contrary concept, what we've called wokeness. It has reached a point now of nihilistic denial of meaning and rejection of all experience and sensory perception as 1984, right? Reject
Yeah,
what your
exactly.
ears tell you and just listen to the party.
Right. Exactly. And it's interesting because I was always taught that the kippah that you wear in your head is a little bit of a reminder
Yes.
of where, that reality leaves off and the
Right.
divine begins. It's like, hey, don't forget.
That's right.
You're not God. And what I see and what I hear coming out of, woke educators, the ones who are really into it, they're doing professional development trainings, even at the tip top of the union. Some of the things that they say is, as you say, it's a rejection of reality. And what really concerns me as well is a rejection of the existence of free will. And they are teaching that to our children. And then, as I've said, I've heard from people say, well, doesn't religion do that? No, it does not. I mean, I've read the Bible, both Old and New Testament, and I don't see anywhere in there where the Judeo-Christian tradition is there's no free will at all. I understand there are little sects of Christianity here and there where it's like, Calvinist or something. It's all been predetermined. Okay. But most people, as you say, not only recognize that this is the tangible, this is reality I can experience with my five senses that may be created by God, but here it is, and the rest is metaphysical, but also that part of the deal is free will. Part of the deal, like part of the arrangement is free will. What is faith without free will? Like you have to actually choose to have it. It's not this automatic thing. Otherwise it would be easy, right?
And not only do I have free will,
right,
but that I must acknowledge that every other creature, every other human creature has free will.
Right.
And therefore, I will treat that person with the respect that what we call it, Tselem Elohim, someone made in the image of God, has. And this is really important because When I say, if I tell you that I'm not going to ask members of a certain minority to meet a certain standard in order to be considered for certain opportunities, I am not only degrading them through the soft bigotry of low expectations, but I'm also robbing them of their free will. I'm saying that no matter how much they work, I mean, yes, everyone has different. Listen, no matter how much I would have worked when I was 20 years old, I could never have been a major league ball player. I don't have the physical equipment. I've got stocky legs and feet that don't bend right. I can't jump, all the things. But most people and most tasks, and yes, not everyone gets to go to Harvard Law School, but we do expect that people who are admitted to Harvard Law School should have the ability to do the work. And it's degrading people to say that they should be not only admitted to a program, but also excused from performing, and then given the same sort of opportunities that those who do perform are given in terms of, professional careers. It has to come out somewhere. And part of this reality, part of this acknowledgement of reality is acknowledgement that there are certain rules about how God made the world work. Gravity, okay? If you build a bridge that doesn't properly account for the effects of gravity, for the curvature of the earth, for torque, for what you need, those things have to go into the formula. And I'm not doing you or the people using that bridge or the people sailing under that bridge any favors by making the decision about who designs and builds and inspects that bridge a political one. But that's the sort of nihilistic, know-nothing world that we've entered. And as put it into the education context, if, look, I could be a big sport about rewarding the highest achievers because I was a great student. I just had to show up, and I was one of those kids. Okay. Until I wasn't. Okay. Until I hit competition when I was in college, that was, appropriate for me. And then I had to learn the hard way that just merely being the smartest guy in the room, first of all, that I wasn't the smartest guy in the room anymore. And even if I were up there, I would still have to perform. Ultimately, you've got to perform. And this is corrosive. The idea that we're not going to evaluate, we're not going to give grades, and we're also going to repeat, we're going to teach children things that are simply not true. And we will penalize and humiliate anyone who challenges these ideas.
Right.
Open inquiry is a fundamental aspect of any intellectual endeavor, including religious scholarship.
Right.
And as you know, growing up in a Jewish family, it is questioning and asking questions is part of being Jewish. That includes the most traditional Talmudic approach to traditional religion. Again, there are certain dogmas. There obviously are certain dogmas. We do operate on the premise that God's word is God's word, but we do not operate on the premise that we are equally qualified to understand and act out on God's words. And this, by the way, is complicated by Protestantism, because Catholicism, like Judaism, from which it sprung, has this idea of an elect. The priesthood that is qualified to explain by virtue of training and a certain spiritual gift, qualified to explain scripture, explain God's word. And Protestantism says, no, let's just crack open the book. It's for everyone. And there's some real truth to that. But it this gets you to democracy.
Right.
And it gets you ultimately to this idea that everyone is equal. It's basically, it's Twitter. Everyone is qualified to opine on all topics. And the more famous you are, the more qualified you are to opine on that topic. And I guess I'm getting a little bit far afield, and I'm not really making an argument for an elitist ordering of society, because that is actually what we have right now.
Right.
That's what we have right now. But the problem is, there was a time when you could trust Americans to reject that by virtue of their, what was considered to be a native skepticism that Americans came with, and a willingness to question anything.
Especially of authority. It was
Right.
sort of the skepticism, I think, that was part of the American character, was that skepticism of kind of an arbitrary authority, of like an aristocracy, regardless of how they got that way, whether it's the kind of, landed gentry style aristocracy or the hereditary aristocracy. Americans regardless where they came from, were leaving that. They didn't want that. They didn't want to be trapped in a kind of feudal serfdom. And America, while it didn't offer any promises, because it didn't, other than that doesn't exist here, you can rise above whatever your station was, that they'd rather take that. They'd rather take the uncertainty of that and leave everything they've ever known behind, including their language, people who look like them, the whole thing, and come here. And so their descendants, I think, that was kind of like in the people who had the gumption, the chutzpah to get up and do that. That's a special kind of people. But we've gotten away from that. You have to reproduce that culture. You have to reproduce that society through both education in your institutions, even the law.
But that requires us to have these first principles. And
right.
Again, if the American concept of skepticism led us to question everything, there was a time when the job of education was to equip you with the tools to understand the limits of your own ability to answer questions that are highly sophisticated, as well as, here it comes, a moral framework, so that we say, okay, I don't know the answer to this question, but I do know that it is morally inappropriate for me to force other people to take a drug. It is morally inappropriate and if they don't, let's say, it's for a contagious disease, and I'm going to make a decision on behalf of society, social contract, whatever your theory is, so that this person doesn't get everybody else sick. These are the hard questions. But there used to be an understanding that you need training to debate hard questions, not merely what do you feel, and now we've reached the point where you can not only not debate hard questions, your feelings about what the answers to the hard questions are given not only value, which should actually be a 0, but they're actually given prominence.
Yep.
So that,
unless of course, and this is where it gets really dicey and dogmatic, and that's why it's very Kafkaesque in this respect, because as you say, your feelings are the most important thing. Unless you are not the high person on the intersectional totem pole, and someone feels offended by something you said or did, or you've violated some precept, and you say, I'm so sorry, I didn't intend that. That was not my intention, etc. Your intentions don't matter. Your feelings don't matter. All that matters are my feelings. And then you would get into this hierarchy of who's allowed to have their feelings matter. And what I've noticed is facts are only facts if the right kind of person said it. Feelings are only valid if the right kind of person felt them. So it is so intricate, and it seems to change with the wind. So like, as soon as you think you've got it nailed down, like, okay, let me get this straight. So this person right now is above me because of like her, marginalization in history, their history of being marginalized. So I have to defer in these ways. But then you forgot they also have this other thing. So you can never get ahead of it. You can never, ever possibly get it right in this particular religion, because whoever is the highest priest in the room, sort of the person anointed in that particular space, wherever you happen to be, decides on the fly what rules apply, how they apply to you, how they apply to them.
Or it might not be on the fly at all. It might be by virtue of your status as
Could be,
a white person
could be.
or a male. I mean,
But I'm saying they'll do that right then and there in that scenario. And another person could come along and do exactly what you did, but they could be like a Black trans female and totally get away with it.
yeah, which means that we're not even really we are simulating having a discussion, but we're not having a discussion at all. In fact,
Right.
it's more like a struggle session. It's an exercise for indoctrination, and it simulates human discourse, but it's not discourse because no one's listening and no one is open to having his mind changed or to learning. And again, our discussion is about learning. Children and people in higher education are simply not open to learning. They stamp their feet. Let's go to the college level. They tell you what the truth is. And this I remember growing up in the late 60s. I remember even then being astonished. Wait a minute. The kids on the college campuses are telling the administrators what courses they're going to teach. Why go to college?
Right.
Why? So one of the things that, about traditional religion is that there is this inherent respect. And this is in tension with our skepticism of a priestly class. There's an inherent respect for what might be more properly called a scribal class, which is people who have sat at the feet of masters, and again mastered a body of knowledge and techniques for understanding whatever that discipline is. Mm-hmm. And again, that is something that can be abused, and you have lots of people doing, engaging in exercises like that and not learning anything because they're repeating mantras. Well, that's where we are now. That has become the mainstream now. Right. And let's look at schools. Let's look at one of the most damaging things that happened in education in our lifetime was that schools were closed. Schools were closed, notwithstanding the virtual lack of vulnerability for children to COVID-19. And they were closed for a very, very long time. And then when children were allowed back into school, they were required to wear masks, whose effectiveness had never been demonstrated and which was repeatedly shown to be illusory. They're still fighting these fights over masks, and they won't say why. And that is what happens when you are stuck in a cult.
Right.
Everyone has to wear a mask. I'm not even going to get into the motivation. I mean, I think there are very insidious reasons for being obsessed with masks, but the mask was the beginning of this irrational approach to letting authority figures make decisions without being subject to challenge that affected an entire generation of students. And we've now built on that, but something that's maybe worse, maybe not worse, I'm not sure, with the entire sexualization of young children and the negation of traditional sex roles. as well as cutting parents out. And look, any cult, every cult
That's what they do.
separates, right? Because when you separate children from their parents, you're separating them from their heritage, from their roots, their intellectual and spiritual roots of what makes them who they are. And, how it is that we have been able to make sexuality the point at which that process has been justified in the schools is far, far beyond me. But it is ruining people's lives, ruining careers, and really making it, and it is inculcating in the schools a real know-nothingism.
Yep.
Where you're telling people, well, you have these sexual characteristics. That doesn't make you a boy. It doesn't make you a girl. Of course it does.
Right. And I mean, but I think part of why they do it, and I've tried to explain this to parents, I truly believe this, it is less to do with sex and more to do with identity formation and that separation from your roots.
Yes,
The
that's right.
one thing you know for certain when you are a little kid, you don't know that many things, but about yourself. But the first thing you truly realize about yourself that distinguishes you is your sex. And I mean, like little kids, it's kind of one of the first things I hold on to. It goes along with sort of their name. It looks which parent they're sort of looking to as like their role model.
Right.
It's all of that. So you go into school, and if one of the first questions you're asked is, "What are your pronouns?" And this is before a kid even knows any parts of speech, so they don't know what a noun is, much less a pronoun. And you begin to teach, 3-year-olds in preschool or 6-year-olds in kindergarten that the thing their parents told them that they were like, I know this about myself, may not be true. So what do? You cause doubt about the thing they were certain about, and you cause doubt about their parents. How could you do this to me? Just assign this to me and let me believe this. And it's that kernel of doubt that they then build on and build on and build on, which, like I said, that's what cults do. They create doubt about the real world, everything you've been told, that anyone loves you. And so my question for you is, now that we've established that they're not really like anything like a true, like a real religion, certainly there's no redemption. But the sort of metaphysical is like right here, it's with you in the room. It's whatever you think it is. But I'm concerned, and I'm not a religious person, so this might sound strange coming from me, but I am concerned about the spirituality of these children, like their spiritual selves. And so I wanted you to speak to that. Like, what does this do to a person in terms of sense of meaning?
Of course. And it's exactly the right question, because this entire premise that you were born in the wrong body is that God is a putz.
Thank you. It's like you don't have to even believe necessarily in religion to be like, really? You think even nature, even if you just believe in nature,
Right.
like is nature that botching it that like it puts, come on.
See,
Sorry.
and there's a huge fallacy that this is premised on, which we know that there are oddities in nature.
Sure.
We know that there are exceptional kinds of creatures, and that's humanity, which is an extraordinarily complex organism, sometimes presents us with people who don't readily fit into the mold. We somehow use this objective fact, this undeniable empirical fact, to say that therefore nobody knows, that therefore everybody is plastic and can merely select. And it's preposterous. It's preposterous.
Scientifically, there are only so many reproductive strategies on the planet. There are very few. Was it like 3? So, ours is, you have these small gametes and they meet, and then, and when to say that is that just doesn't exist is, you talk about denial of reality. It's insane. And to your point, they'll say clownfish, but what about clownfish? Well, human beings are not clownfish. We're also not flowers. We're not reptiles. We're not those other things. But this is what they do. And our children don't know enough about anything about how the world works to debate this with their teachers.
And it is impossible, moreover, once this worldview is inculcated into them, for them to have any respect whatsoever for any traditional religious conception of the natural order and of God's wisdom, and much less the specific narrative of creation, man and woman, he created them. Obviously, God is making all these mistakes all the time. And luckily, finally, after gazillions of years of evolution, of all this great happenstance, we finally figured out how to do it better. It is absolutely, and people want to be compassionate. And they use this desire to be compassionate as a rationale to give up critical thinking also. Because
it's also hubris. And from everything I've read in the Bible, it's a sin. Like, you do not get to decide that you know better or that you are God for any reason. And least of all, your own self-aggrandizement. So, I want to be a good person. I want to be a compassionate person. In whose eyes? In whose sight? The sight of the person on the street, the total stranger, your students in the class? Who is judging you ultimately? And so to me, the idea that I'm going to abandon reality and I'm going to teach a bunch of little children things that are not even true so that I can look like that has to be, if I were a religious person, I'd be like, that's got to be the biggest sin there is. Like, who the heck are you?
Well, I mean, on a related note, even if we were to say we can't agree, we simply are going to have to agree to disagree about these issues of sexuality.
Right.
Why are all these teachers discussing sexuality with young children?
Yeah.
Who are you indeed? And there is a very, very, again, this goes back to breaking the link between the child and the parents and saying what they were telling you at home is a way of controlling you and manipulating you. Here, in this agency of the state or of the collective that is public school or private school,
right?
We're going to take care of you. We're going to tell you what to do, and you'll trust us going forward. That is, and again, and you won't ask questions. You don't ask questions. We mock you for suggesting things that don't fit the narrative. Yes, I mean, the very long answer to the question that you started out with is there is a cultic religion-like, but not religion as you and I understand it, but something that's more like paganism. Because, paganism is premised on the idea that there's a God for each thing I want in the universe. And by figuring out how to serve that God, I know what all the different controls are. So I do a rain dance or I do a sacrifice for fertility. Then God does what I tell him to do, which is the opposite of true divine service, which is that you want to know, what does God want from me? Instead, it's this divinity, this power effectuates my personal desires this way, and I will follow a formula. I mean, one thing that Judaism absolutely doesn't do is say, if you want this to happen, do this. Oh, we do have traditions that certain things are what we call a segula. Certain things are a sort of they do tend to channel attention from God in certain respects, but there are no promises, no guarantees. Ultimately, God decides what's best for us. And often these segulas are ways for us to grow ourselves and have a better understanding of the usefulness of what it is we're asking for and our place in the universe.
Mhm.
These are huge issues.
Yeah. Well, yeah, so in the time we have left, I just want to ask you quickly as a lawyer. So regardless of whether we are able certainly in this short show to, nail down and define this religious like thing that they're doing in our schools, I still feel in my primitive understanding of the law that it is a violation of the civil rights of the parents and of the children that they are doing this the way that they're doing it. In other words, they're not bringing in an idea that's saying, hey, some people believe this. What do you think? They're bringing it as this is what you need to learn. You must learn it. We're also going to test you on it. We're going to hold you accountable to know it.
Yeah.
And it directly assaults, in no uncertain terms in many cases, the beliefs and values that they're bringing, that they have at home, their parental rights and parental authority, the boundaries of, minors cannot consent to all kinds of boundary violations. And so what I'm wondering is are there avenues for parents or for other people to say, hey, what you're doing and what you're teaching is a violation of my child's rights? I mean, we keep focusing on the parents, and that is important, but I think the children have rights here too. And they're trying to do that now. They're trying to say, you don't own your children. It's your children to have rights. Yes. Speaking of those rights, one of them is informed consent, which they cannot give. So stop.
So you're asking a really important question, because after all, if you take us at our word that this, let's say it is a religion.
Yeah.
Well, then don't its practitioners have freedom of religion also? And shouldn't they be entitled? No, that's not what we're talking about. That's not what we mean. It is, you're right, it is a violation of children's civil rights. And there is a stream of lawsuits that have been filed in the last year or so where children who have been transitioned by schools outside the, authority of the parents, and without, in fact, affirmatively hiding from parents what they're doing. Children are suing, and I think are making some progress about what is, again, just as children can't give informed consent, they also can't really. If you can't give informed consent, you also can't litigate on your own behalf. Someone has to be your voice who does have that capability. You don't own your children? You're right. I don't own my children, but no one else on earth is presumptively a better judge of what's best for my children than I am. I can lose that presumption by not acting in the best interest of the children. But until I do, the only way we can order things is to say parents have the right and the responsibility. They come together to decide what's best for their children. And all the more so when you are in a situation where you're going to move the child from the status quo. And yes, there is a status quo. Even if you're stupid enough to say, what sex were you, what gender were you assigned at birth? An utterly asinine formulation. But even then, okay, there's a status quo. I was assigned a certain gender at birth. Once you want to make a change in the status quo, then the burden should be on you to demonstrate why you, as a school, any kind of collective, or the state, or whatever the case may be, should make the decision rather than the parent.
Yeah. And this is, the challenge is, I think parents don't even know their own rights, and they don't know how to advocate. So do you have any final words on like what can parents do to, if they find themselves in this kind of a position, and obviously it'd be good to go get a lawyer, but I know that's not that easy to do. Are there things that they can do proactively when they're about to put their child in school? Obviously, I would hope they don't, but let's say they don't listen to me and they go sign the kid up for kindergarten. Are there steps they can take to preempt this and put them on notice?
The best way for them to get themselves on notice is to request politely and firmly the what is it called? The curriculum for that class. What are the children going to be taught? What are the units? What's the subject matter? And what is, if it's post preschool, once they're reading, what's the reading list? If you get pushback on that, it's time to realize that you have a problem, and people should look at my friend Nicole Solis and see what she's gone through in Rhode Island as a result of asking those questions and finding out that her school system didn't want to answer.
Right. Do you think there's fixing this, Ron, or do you think parents have to just kind of pony up and do it themselves?
I do think that the public schools, because of the role of unions and the connection between unions and the state, are to a very large extent hopeless. But so are a lot of private schools. It's a more complex answer than
Right,
that.
right. And I know you have a hard stop, you have to go, but I'm really grateful that you took the time to come and sit with me and talk this through. I find it fascinating actually thinking about this as a religion, and I think the way you explained it makes it clear it's not really like a religion that we think of, more like a cult, but certainly or paganism. I think that's a great analogy, and I'm glad you did that. So thank you very much. And so our audience can find you at Culmination Podcast and also on X. What is your handle? I follow you and I don't even know it by heart, but just Ron Coleman.
At Ron Coleman.
At Ron
with
Coleman.
an E. Yep.
And if you're not already following him, you should be. And you should listen to the podcast because there are just, never ending great takes. So thank you so, so much. I really appreciate you taking the time, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
See you soon.
Bye.
All right, Deb.